All right, let's make it official. Good morning. Good to be with you for lights. Also want to just quickly welcome those of you who are joining us online. If that's you, and you've noticed you've had a bit of a misses in the message, we're working on some kinks in the technology here. I think we're ready to go. So I welcome you back. Or if you're just sleeping in, we still love you. Before I get into that sleeping thought, I had a thought hit me and I don't want to forget. Is there mops this week? Okay, I forgot to check the calendar. Sorry, Mumco. Thank you. Which means after the service, if you're able, a couple could help us set up about 8 tables up front, that would be great. I just couldn't remember the calendar. I forgot to check it. Anyways, back to the time change. Preaching on time change day. It's always a little challenging. I don't want to complain though, because I believe in the significance of being grateful, having a posture of praise and thanksgiving. But them stinking Oilers, man, seriously. I figured it's 5-1 after 2. I can lay the game in the back and go to sleep. And the next thing I know, it's 5-1. I got to stay up to the end of the game. And not get the sleep I need for today. So if I'm a little foggy this morning, blame it on the Oilers. Speaking of the Oilers and a little bit of physical activity, today as we journey and continue through Luke, we come to Luke chapter 8. Our main point of the day will be that Jesus' might is greater than sickness and death. So that will be the main theme of the day that we were already through. But before I get to Jesus might being greater than sickness, I do want to add that it is important for us to beforehand do our own part. Okay? My lovely wife is on a little bit of a health kick right now. I'm joining her. I appreciate the motivation she gives me, the significance of understanding our need for skeletal muscle mass, all that kind of stuff. I'm pushing out PBs, okay, everybody? It might not look like it, but I'm doing the work, I swear. Now, that said, yesterday, she had this hair-fangled idea, and it came from one of you. Y'all need to be careful of the stuff you tell her, because then she makes me do it. All right? Reed family. It's your fault that I am preaching with a stiff neck today. She had this great idea. We're going to take these weights and put them in our backpack that you're supposed to carry lunch kits in, and go for a walk around Fort Saskatchewan. So I am with this backpack. I'm supposed to carry a lunch kit and a binder in with 30 pounds of weight. And now I'm like, the health kick is real. You did that for 2 hours? You guys are psycho. We got to do our part. Now, speaking of doing our part, the first service gained a little information the last couple of weeks, and it wasn't planned. It just is one of those things that happened in the midst of the friendly banter. Because I prayed for the kids in the first service, and one of the little ones was up here with snacks 2 weeks ago, and so I was sharing snacks while I was praying for the little one. And then Pastor Dan got up that week to speak, and he suggested the whole church bring me snacks the week after, which would have been nice. But I told them not to because last Sunday I was fasting for a colonoscopy. So I just told the whole church that in front of that whole first service. You guys missed that excitement. Anyways, that was my week and my last weekend. But I share that though because it is important when it comes to the topic at hand to for us to do our part. And I recognize that I have some, it might be small, but I have some influence in people, if you will. And so my brothers, I'm just here simply saying, do your part. All right? Do your part. Get your checkups done. Do all that kind of stuff. It's not a sign of weakness when we don't go into it. It's a sign of weakness. We're I can do it by myself. No. Listen, brothers, take care of yourself. We need you, okay? We need you. And I just felt like it was important to kind of speak that into existence before we get to Jesus' might being greater than sickness. Now, on the topic of Jesus' might being greater than sickness, there's there is a a fun story in our midst right now. She's normally in our first service. Her name is Brenda. I call her Mama B. She's like a real life Baba. And I call her Baba and Mama B because I grew up with the Baba, so like I get that world, and that's just who she is. But she had been working through a diagnosis of Charcot foot, and for the last month, she was in and out of here in a wheelchair, uncertain if she might even ever walk again because of this diagnosis. And lo and behold, like this week, she went shopping for uglier, and the ugliest orthopedic shoes you could possibly get because she's walking already, and their doctors are totally amazed that she's at the place of walking so quickly after this diagnosis. And Mama B will tell you it's because her church is praying. And it's an example of the power of prayer. And that still today, Jesus' might is greater than sickness. This all leads us into Luke 8. And I really quickly just want to pick up at Luke 8, verse 1. And for those of you who've been here and tracking with us, you already will know this and have heard this, but because we're a little bit behind due to just the technological struggle, those of you who are online, Luke 8, 1 says this: soon afterward, Jesus began a tour of the nearby towns and villages, preaching and announcing the good news about the kingdom of God. And this is super important for us. Because as we've seen all the way through Luke, when Jesus shows up, the kingdom shows up. When Jesus shows up, the kingdom shows up. And his primary message throughout his earthly ministry is a message of the arrival of the kingdom of God. And he's announcing its arrival, and he's demonstrating the means in which we are to step into and live out this reality as servants or ambassadors in the kingdom of God. And here he is again, once again, on his way on a preaching tour of this very reality. Fast forward. The struggle with Luke is Luke's a doctor. He's writes and writes, and these chapters are lost. We can't hit them all. But we get going, and he begins his teaching and his telling of stories, and we see that. And then we get to 8:22. And if I was to speak on 8:22, I would make this the theme of this section. I would say that Jesus' might is greater than nature as he calms the storm. Jesus' might is greater than nature. And then we keep reading, and you see this incredible account of Jesus coming into conflict with this demon-possessed man, and how this all plays, what all happens here. If I was to teach and work through this part, I would say that Jesus' might is greater than demons. And this then brings us to verse 40, which is where we're going to pick up as we get on our main theme of the day of Jesus' might is greater than sickness and death. We pick up verse 40, and it reads like this. On the other side of the lake, the crowds welcomed Jesus because they had been waiting for him. Then a man named Jairus, a leader of the local synagogue, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come home with him. His only daughter, who was about 12 years old, was dying. We come into this story now, and we are confronted with a man named Jairus. And two things in just this little passage that I want to bring to our attention really quick is Jairus' name literally means he whom God will awaken. He whom God will awaken. Now, if you're familiar with this story, you know where this story is going, and you can see the foreshadowing in that name of he, God, will awaken. And then the second thing I want to bring on is Jairus is a leader of the local synagogue. He is a religious man of faith. And as he comes and meets and greets Jesus, notice how he does so. he falls to his feet. This is a clear act of surrender, of worship, as he comes and meets with Jesus. Now, the stories we're going to quickly see is going to take a bit of a diversion, if you will, and then it's going to circle back around at the end. And so we continue on in the middle of verse 42 to meet someone else. As Jesus went with him, he was surrounded by the crowds. A woman in the crowd had suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding, and she could find no cure. Coming up behind Jesus, she touched the fringe of his robe, and immediately the bleeding stopped. We're introduced to a second person, this woman who has been bleeding for 12 years. Now, there's two things that are really important for us to understand here. And I know a number of you will know this, but to make sure we're all tracking here, this is really important, okay? In Jesus' day, 2,000 years ago, this is just the cultural reality, like it or not, it's just the way it was. In Jesus' day, in a culture that is very patriarchal, okay? For her as a woman, there would be cultural and social, even sometimes economic struggles and things she would have to face just because she was a woman. This is just the reality of the day and the culture at hand. But there's a second piece to her that's really important for a Hebrew or a Jewish background, and that she as a woman has been bleeding now for 12 years. Now, this might not land for us initially because we live in a culture where when someone is sick or when someone is not well, right, it is our natural sort of extension to like try and help, to be a part of a process of healing and even just wholeness with them. But in Jesus' day, again, this is the reality. She would have been looked at as ceremonially unclean. This means for her, she wasn't allowed to be a part of the gatherings of worship. For her, she wouldn't be allowed to be a part of the community of faith. She would have not only been isolated, she would have been looked at as an outcast. So here's this woman who would have been culturally seen as an outcast, now approaching Jesus. 45. Who touched me? Jesus asked. Everyone denied it. And Peter said, Master, the whole crowd is pressing up against you. But Jesus said, someone deliberately touched me, for I felt the healing power go out from me. I love this verse. I mean, we talked about this at Christmas, but let's just reestablish Luke 1 and 2. We established that Jesus is fully God and fully human. And we see in this verse the part of Jesus who is fully human and asking a very human question: who touched me? And the example for us here is that Jesus is ministering and serving out of his humanness. He's ministering and serving as an example for us what it looks like to be kingdom servants, what it looks like to be kingdom ambassadors. And here he recognized something has happened, but I don't know who. We see the humanity of Jesus in this verse. I love that. When the woman realized she could not stay hidden, she began trembling. Notice it again. And fell to her knees in front of him. The whole crowd heard her explain why she had touched him and that she had been immediately healed. Daughter, he said to her, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. I love Jesus' response to this woman who would have been, socially, culturally dealing with some challenges, to this woman who was sick, who was not well, who would have been, as a result, seen as an outcast. At the presence and at the person of Jesus, Jesus immediately gives a word and is shifting her identity. He moves her so quickly from outcast to daughter. Now, I don't know what it's like to have daughters. I don't have the videos of Brother Ken. That was awesome. People used to bug me all the time. When are you guys going to try for a third? And, have that little girl. And she would say, can you guarantee it's going to be a girl? Because these two boys are crazy. I don't have a daughter, but I anticipate, by God's grace, I hope to one day have 2 daughter-in-laws. I pray for them already. I can't wait for the day I can spoil my daughters. And Jesus, in this moment, transitions this woman who'd been seen as an outcast to now say, no, know that you are a daughter. You're loved. You're cared for. And just really quickly, notice that he says, your faith has made you well. I'm going to come back to that. Go in peace. 49. While he was still speaking to her, Jesus there he is just engaging with this new daughter. While he was still speaking to her, a messenger arrived from the home of Jairus, the leader of the synagogue. He told him, your daughter is dead. There's no use troubling the teacher now. But when Jesus heard what had happened, he said to Jairus, don't be afraid. Just have faith, and she will be healed. Did you catch how similar that last line there was to the line just earlier? To the woman who was bleeding, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Verse 50, don't be afraid. Just have faith, for she will be healed. And there actually is a third example of this very line in close proximity to this account. Now, last week we quickly went through chapter 7, and Dave did that for us, but I just want to take it back to chapter 7, the end of chapter 7, really, really quickly, where Jesus is interacting with a woman who is a known sinner, which is so ironic because aren't we all sinners? But nonetheless, there she is labeled as just another example of what I was already stating, a known sinner. And in verse 50, Jesus said to the woman, your faith, the third time, has saved you. Go in peace. But let's fast forward even a little bit more to the beginning of this interaction between this known sinner, this woman who was a known sinner, and Jesus. In 7 verse 38, then she knelt behind him at his feet. And it ends with your faith has saved you. Go in peace. In all 3 examples, you find the person that Jesus is interacting with begin by coming to Jesus and falling to their knees in front of him, an act of surrender, an act of worship, and then Jesus declaring your faith, or have faith, has saved you, or will make you well, as she will be healed. Now, we can see the similarity in English, but what's really, really important to know is that in all 3 of these examples, the saved you, make you well, and she will be healed is actually the literal same word in its Greek in the New Testament writing. It's the word sozo, a word that can be encapsulated or summarized as being saved, being made well, being healed, but it is the same word all 3 times. And interestingly enough, this word sozo, it occurs 54 times in the Gospels. In instances where it's used, 14 are related to deliverance from disease or from demon possession. We see that in this passage, deliverance from disease. In 20 instances, it's a reference to being rescued from physical life, from impending peril, or maybe even instant death. As we're going to see in just a moment, this is the fate of Jairus' daughter. And then finally, the remaining 20 times is reference to spiritual salvation. The same word is used to tell all three of these instances, but in all three, this sozo power of God is activated by faith. The conscious decision to have faith, to place trust in God. It wraps up like this. So when they arrived at the house, Jesus wouldn't let anyone go with him except Peter, John, James, and the little girl's father and mother. The house was filled with people weeping and wailing. But he said, Stop weeping. She isn't dead. She's only asleep. But the crowd laughed at him because they all knew she had died. When Jesus took her by the hand and said in a loud voice, My child, get up. And at that moment, her life returned, and she immediately stood up. When Jesus told them to give her something to eat, then Jesus told them to give her something to eat. Her parents were overwhelmed, but Jesus insisted that they not tell anyone what had happened. Jesus, who's fully God, fully man, shows up. And as Jesus shows up, the kingdom of God shows up. And in Luke chapter 8, we see that he is one whose might is greater than nature, whose might is greater than demons, whose might is greater than sickness, whose might is greater than death. And to this day, Jesus' might is greater. He can move as he needs, as he wishes, in and out of any scenario we come into. He is the one true living God, and his kingdom is a kingdom where healing and resurrection is released. I believe and I'm convinced this to be true physically, but also and very significantly spiritually. The scriptures tell the story of each of us in our own way, turning and walking away from God. In no unclear ways, the scriptures tell us how we are dead in our sin. We are separated from God. We're separated from him here in this life, and we're separated from him in the life to come. Call that hell. Dead. But God designed us, as we sang today, created to walk with our Creator, wanted to have a relationship with us, and ensured there was a means for this relationship to take place, to be activated via faith. And when we come to Jesus and we say, Jesus, I recognize that I'm dead in my sin. I am sorry. Jesus, will you forgive me of my sin? Now, Jesus, take my life, it's yours. I want to live for you, Jesus. Something happens, something shifts within us, both instantaneously and as a process we go through, where we now move from death and are now made alive. A miracle takes place as we enter into the kingdom of God, a kingdom of resurrection. And today, we have the chance to come to the communion table and consider this kingdom of healing and resurrection that's made available through communion. In front of you are these little communion cups in the back of the chairs there. I invite you to just pick it up and just hold it for a moment. When you open the top part, you'll see a little wafer, a little cracker. That part is symbolic of Jesus' body that has been given for us. Then below it, you'll see a little cup. It's a cup of juice. That cup is a symbol of Jesus' blood that has been shed for us. It's the cup of the new covenant where we recognize that we experience forgiveness through faith in Jesus and what he did. And I want to give us some time as Ken sings, as Tef plays, to just consider what it might look like in the posture of my own heart today, to come and to just fall at the feet of Jesus, to just bow before him and say, I surrender, to just bow before him and say, I'm here to worship, to just come before him and recognize our need for his kingdom power in our life, a kingdom that marks us with healing, marks us with resurrection. Physically, yes, but also spiritually. I give you a chance as this saying to just listen into the words, or you can close your eyes and bow and just pray in your heart. Just take this time, you and God. Just consider the reality that Jesus has shown up, and when he shows up, his kingdom shows up, and he wants to change you. When they're done, we'll partake together.